Greetings, Earthling Reader friends. Today we are going to be reviewing Night Film by Marisha Pessl. I gave this book 4 stars, but I was between 3 and 4 stars, so I'm going to give it like a 3.5, even though on Goodreads I gave it a 4, so yeah, 3.5. I'm rating it between a 3 and a 4 because as much as I like the book and as much as I really enjoyed it, I did have a couple of problems with the book, so that's why. That's really the only thing. So a synopsis of the book is that it reminded me a little bit of like an Alfred Hitchcock Presents episode, if that makes sense. If any of you watch Alfred Hitchcock Presents reruns, if you don't, then that's probably not going to make sense. But anyway, so basically this writer, he is an investigative journalist. He has written a story about this reclusive director of horror films who is like very mysterious. He has a cult following, and then he becomes disgraced because of this story, this writer, because he gets a false tip and it kind of like ruins his career. So he's put on fluff pieces and stuff, and then the daughter 5 years later of the reclusive film director dies. And so what he decides to do is he decides to investigate her death. And along the way, he meets a drug dealer, I think, who has relations to the girl who died, Ashley. And he meets the last person who saw her alive, who is a girl who worked at a coat check, who's trying to become an actress, who become his assistants. I was very intrigued by the premise because it really reminded me of like a Twilight Zone / Alfred Hitchcock's Presents vibe. And I'm a huge Hitchcock fan, so this was like my dream. I found it really interesting and I thought it would be right up my alley based on what I read about it, what was going around on BookTube about it. However, I do have some gripes about it. So, as much as I love the book, because I did love it, it was way too long. I mean, I was reading the ebook version of it, and it felt like it was never going to end, because I felt like they spent too much time on certain aspects of the story, over detailing, drawing it out, rehashing things that didn't need to be gone over again, and that just really, I don't know, put me off a little bit of the story and took away some of the enjoyment that I would have had. Yeah, I just thought it was a little too long. I mean, it was good. It was a little too long for my liking, because I don't think it had to be as long as it was to accomplish what the story was trying to accomplish. Another point that I had with this book was that I felt it was not evenly paced, because there were small increments of the story that worked and they were fast paced or they were evenly paced, and they worked and they moved quickly or they moved how they were supposed to move and it flowed. But then there were other parts that kind of got hung up on certain things, plot points that were unnecessary and took away from the story a lot. Stuff that didn't fit and kind of catches on things. It took too long to get certain points across and to move to the next scene, in my opinion. At some points, most of the story is pretty good, but at some plot points, there were definitely times where the story could have moved along, and it didn't. Okay. The ending. We have to talk about the ending of this book. As much as I love this book, and I really, really do, and I know it sounds like I'm kind of tearing it apart, but I do love, love, love this book. The ending. I don't hate the ending. I was just really expecting it. There's a lot of clues that point you in the direction of where the story is going to go, and I'd say probably if you're like halfway through the book, then you should know how the story is going to end. But in this book, if you're like halfway through and you've been reading like diligently, then you should kind of have a picture of how the story is going to end. Because it's made obvious, like through certain clues and stuff, and through certain hints about the different characters. I just felt like that was, I don't know, it took away from the feel of the story. Like maybe the author should have taken some of the hints out so it's a little bit more of a surprise. I don't think the ending could have changed because I think this conclusion is the only thing that would have been logical for the novel. But maybe there shouldn't have been that many hints as to where the story would end up. I really liked how the novel played out like a horror movie. I really do. It was a very interesting book. I have to say that. It was really good, and I do recommend it. Especially the ambiguous ending. It reminded me of the Birds, the ending of the Birds. How it's like we just don't know, and you're left to your own imagination. The Bird short story. And I really, really like that because most books, they come to a conclusion where you know everything and you're left with all the answers. But this book gave you questions and just left you with lots and lots of things to ask yourself and think about and ponder. And I liked that because not a lot of books do that, and that was really rare. And it was really good to see that, it was cool. Hopper, Nora, and McGrath were perfect character types for this kind of book. And let me tell you why. An actress, a drug dealer, and an investigative reporter. They all bring interesting things to the table. They bring different skills to the table, which if you've read the book, you know. And I think it's just an interesting cast of characters, along with the reclusive director and his daughter. I think I think it provides interesting content for a novel. Plus the fact that they were multi-dimensional characters and they weren't just flat. They worked, they did develop a little bit, and towards the end, you could see that they had definitely developed into more their own character as opposed to just something for the story. There were a ton of great settings for the book, and I have to say the settings provided a lot of good ambiance for the story and what was going on in the story at the point where the settings were. Like, the Peak was a really cool setting. That was the director's house. The rehab facility was interesting. The man's house, the security guard's house, I thought was an interesting turn of events. And I just thought the setting was kind of like a character in itself because although the book mostly takes place in New York, there are a few places outside of New York where they go. The Peak is probably my favorite setting out of all of these because I feel like it's the most mysterious and it has the most to do with the story. And it was a really cool place, kind of creepy, but it gives off odd vibes. I don't know. I'm just rambling now, but the Peak was pretty cool. I think a point that kind of deterred me from the story a little bit was the fact that at some points in the story there was so much going on. I can't even give an example because it's hard to think back. I mean, I read this book a few weeks ago, and I'm just doing the review now, but I read this book a few weeks ago, and there was just a lot going on at certain points, and it was hard to remember certain things. Because something might be mentioned once and then it becomes a whole big deal later in the book. So, I don't know. It was just a little difficult, to be honest. My final point is that Cordova and Ashley are two of the most fascinating characters that I have ever read about in my life. Cordova being the film director that the story is about, and Ashley being his daughter. They are two of the most mysterious and multifaceted, interesting characters I have ever read in my entire life. The reason I kept reading the story like and so intently was because of them, because I had to find out what happened to them, and I wanted to find out more about them because they're so cloaked in mystery that you don't know so much about them as you think you do. Favorite quote is, "Mortal fear is as crucial a thing to our lives as love. It cuts to the core of our being and shows us what we are. Will you step back and cover your eyes, or will you have the strength to walk to the precipice and look out?" I just thought that was beautiful writing. And I really like that quote a lot. I would recommend this book to horror film or film noir fans who are looking for like a suspense read, an easy suspense read. It's a little long, but the ending is definitely worth it. There's an interesting cast of characters, and the settings are pretty beautiful, I would say, and they definitely add to the piece. So that's what I would say, and I definitely recommend this book. I mean, as much as it feels like a tear it apart, I definitely recommend this book. That is it for today. If you like this kind of content, you can like and subscribe, or down there. Catch you later.